OpenVAS is one of the most underrated vulnerability scanners in the industry. I have been using OpenVAS in my professional life right from when it was simply OpenVAS to now when it has become GVM and more complex. But before we begin, let's try to understand what exactly is OpenVAS. The best thing to learn about a topic, especially a vulnerability scanner, is by simply searching for it. So let me quickly open the OpenVAS official website. Let me type OpenVAS. And here you'll see the OpenVAS Vulnerability Scanners official page. OpenVAS is a fully featured vulnerability scanner which includes both authenticated and unauthenticated scanning on different protocols. Let's click on the history to know more about OpenVAS. And this is quite interesting. In 2005, the developers of vulnerability scanner Nessus decided to discontinue their open source work. And since they discontinued it, some developers who were working on the open source tool made several forks of it. Finally, in 2008, the company Greenbone Networks was founded that essentially has the following business plan, and they were driving OpenVAS since then. So this company actually had two versions, one community version that everyone can use and then one commercial version, and it went on like that till 2016. And in 2017, since there was a lot of confusion between OpenVAS and Greenbone, they finally rebranded it to make it Greenbone Vulnerability Management from OpenVAS. So now the Greenbone Vulnerability Management or GVM that you will use is actually OpenVAS. So if earlier you were working with OpenVAS 9, it's actually GVM now, pushed as GVM 10, but it still worked the same way. You have GVM 10, which is open source, and then you have Greenbone's vulnerability management system, which is a paid service. To me, this is really funny because even though they have rebranded OpenVAS to GVM, this actually created more confusion in the community. And people were now confused. Is OpenVAS still there? What is GVM? Does OpenVAS work with the GVM or not? It was so confusing that it's also a bit unclear on the official Kali website. So if I go to GVM, the Kali Linux tools, because OpenVAS used to come as a default scanner with Kali Linux, but then it moved to just be installable via the packet manager, which for Kali Linux is apt. And right now it's still in the same way. However, instead of installing OpenVAS, because earlier we used to do apt install OpenVAS, now you do apt install GVM. In the documentation, it's actually mentioned that you can install via OpenVAS this line, and I'm pretty sure there was also an apt package. But if you want to use the same scanner OpenVAS or GVM, which is now GVM 10, you should use the GVM commands. So instead of using apt install OpenVAS, you should use apt install GVM. Going back to the history, if we go further down, so OpenVAS had this thing called feeds. So consider them like these modules or these patterns that actually detect the vulnerability. And several companies actually took credit for the feeds, even though they haven't done anything. And that's why they renamed it to Greenbone Community Feed, so that now the users of OpenVAS or GVM may finally know that these feeds or the modules that actually identify vulnerabilities are being created by Greenbone. Now, after reading all of this, you might be thinking, oh, they are privatizing the entire OpenVAS as GVM. And to some extent, it's true. But you have to understand that GVM is a free and open source, fully fledged vulnerability scanner that provides you awesome reports, has a really good user access management, and it's actually not that tough to learn. So even if you are not buying the GVM product or its services from Greenbone, you can actually use the open source version and run scans on your networks or on your website. Yeah, you heard me right. GVM has the capability to scan networks. If you provide it SSH credentials, it can actually scan the shell and the underlying OS for the most common vulnerabilities based on the community feed, and also it can scan the websites and find vulnerabilities. What this means is you can actually provide OpenVAS with just a website URL or simply an IP address, and OpenVAS will scan everything on their IP address, and all of that for free if you're using the community edition. I really like this page and how the history that they have mentioned, because it gives you a clear overview of where OpenVAS, or I should say GVM, stands and clarifies all the confusion. Even when I was using it, I had a lot of questions which were answered eventually on this page. Now, if we go here, we could see the architecture. This is a really good page. You should go to their official GitHub page and check out all the documentation. So let me go to their GitHub page, github.com/greenbone. And you'll see all the work they have been doing for a while. You also see all the repositories that they have and all the work they are doing for open source community. Alright, so now we know a brief history of what exactly is OpenVAS and how it became GVM. Let's quickly go back to the documentation. So here you have the entire documentation. You can see the whole architecture. So GVM is actually a collection of different modules that are stitched together. So you have your OSP scanner, your GMP clients, you have a web browser, finally, Greenbone Security Assistant provides, and at the core, you have the Greenbone Vulnerability Manager daemon that actually is the central brain that takes all the input from these different modules and passes them through relevant modules and manages them appropriately. Great, so now since this is clear, let's quickly go for installation and see how you can leverage the Greenbone Community Edition, or I should say the Community Edition of GVM, for your system scanning and evaluate if you want the paid version. So the easiest way to do is, which I will do, there are actually a number of ways of doing this, which have changed, I'm guessing, from the last time I actually installed GVM, because I remember we used to have a virtual machine with just OpenVAS on it, and it was an ISO, and you could put it in VirtualBox, or you could put it or deploy it on your AWS infrastructure, or simply have a server on premise and you can install the ISO there and that's it, and you can run it. But you can also do it simply by using Kali Linux. So this is what we're going to do. Let's go back here to the Kali tools page, and you see there are 4 or 5 commands here: GVM check setup, feed update, GVM setup, GVM start, and GVM stop. And believe me, the way they have made it, it's really intuitive. Once you start installing it, you'll see all the commands. So the Kali package managers have done a great job of maintaining the packages and creating these commands that you could directly use, and it should work out of the box. So let's start installing it, and it's pretty simple. You simply do a sudo apt install and gv. Let me give my password, and this should install GVM on my machine. As you can see, it's taking 488 MB. I'm going to press yes and follow the simple ways of installing a package via apt package manager.
A few moments later.
Alright, so now I have GVM successfully installed on my Kali machine. Just to let you guys know which Kali version am I using, I'll simply do a lsp please -a. And you can see I'm using the 2022.2 version of Kali rolling. So it's fairly recent and I have updated it as you must as a vigilant security engineer. Alright, so now I have GVM installed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start the setup. So let's quickly check back on our GVM official Kali tool page. And you see there's a GVM check setup, GVM feed update, GVM setup, GVM start, GVM stop. So what we're going to do now is we will do a GVM setup. So let me do a GVM setup. So let me run it via sudo. So I'll run sudo GVM setup, and this should install the entire GVM on my machine. And as it's installing, you could also see there are a lot of things that are being downloaded with NASL extension. And this NASL is actually the Nessus attack script language. That's the extension they have since OpenVAS was actually the community version of the nessus scanner. And just to add, these NASL files are the network vulnerability tests that identify the vulnerability, which are also called Greenbone community feeds now. Since I have thrown around a lot of information and the OpenVAS or GVM is still installing, let me quickly give you a brief summary of what we know so far. So first things first, OpenVAS is now GVM because of rebranding under the company called Greenbone. Now this GVM is not a single piece of software, but a collection of different softwares working together with each other. Let's call them modules. These modules talk to each other like we saw in architecture of the GVM documentation, and to continuously identify vulnerabilities. It has the Greenbone community feeds that help GVM in identifying vulnerabilities. And now we have GVM installed with our admin user created and the password that's given. You might want to save this password. Even if you forget, do not worry. There are ways how we can create or change the admin password directly from the console. For the sake of convenience, I'm going to save this username and password. I'm going to simply copy it and paste it in my text editor for safekeeping. Alright, so we will follow the next step, which is clearly written here also, that we need to check the GVM setup, and we can do it by performing a GVM check setup. I think I would need to do it again with sudo because I want to give it root privileges, but let me try doing a simple GVM check setup, and if that doesn't work, we're going to sudo it. So let's do the GVM check setup, and yes, it needs to be ran as root, so I'm going to do that, sudo double exclamations, and now that's my password, and it's checking if my installation of GVM is correct or not. You can also see how it's actually starting the OpenVAS service and a bunch of other services like GVMD and all the components that we saw in the diagram. Alright, so it now says our GVM setup is okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it. So I'm going to open the browser, and actually wait, instead of doing this, there is a better way of doing it and also telling you the commands, and that's by using the GVM's command in Kali Linux for starting it, which is GVM start. So instead of going through there, I will just do a GVM and do a start. And of course, I need to do this as a root. And it says GVM is already started. Great. So now we need to know which port it's running on. And I think I know it's 9392, but just to be sure, let's double check it. So in order to do that, let me open a new shell. I will open it using Ctrl+Shift+T, and you can actually check all the services running on your machine by the netstat command, and it will show you all the corresponding ports. So I just simply type here netstat -tu. Actually, even if we do TUL, it will show us what all connections it's being listening to, and we could clearly see that there is a port 9392 which is being used. So I can close this and open our browser and then simply type localhost :9392. And for some reason the connection is reset, so let me check it back. And actually I could use the other browser that I have already opened, and I'll check the netstat again, this time here -well, and it does say there's something running on 9392. So what I'm going to do is open the browser, paste it, and I think I need to mention the protocol, and yes, it needs to be HTTPS, and I would accept risk and continue. And now we are on our login page. Let's use our username and password that we saved. So we have admin, and password we could clearly see is this one. So I'm going to copy this and paste it here. I'm just going to save it. And you see that we have OpenVAS up and running. This is the dashboard, and as we go ahead in this tutorial, we'll see how we could utilize these dashboards, what kind of stats it shows, and how everything in OpenVAS or now GVM works.
So this concludes the history and setup of OpenVAS or GVM 10. In the part 2 of this video, we will learn how to actually run our scans, set up targets, and configure specific properties to better customize our scans. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any specific question or feature that you would want me to cover in the part 2 of this video, please comment below. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.